Across every era, every continent, and basically every major civilization in human history, there is exactly one element that has absolutely captivated our imagination. Welcome to This Explainer, where we're diving headfirst into a story of human obsession, extreme greed, and the ultimate wild metal. We are going to explore the history of exactly why gold is most precious. So let's go completely down the rabbit hole and figure out what makes this stuff so magical. Think about it for a second. Let's start with this central mystery. Out of all the elements, all the rocks and minerals on planet Earth, why did this one single shiny yellow rock spark literal global migrations and become the anchor for modern economies? Well, for starters, it's highly malleable, it's totally fungible, and amazingly, it is extremely unreactive chemically. That means it literally never tarnishes or corrodes. You could drop a gold coin at the bottom of the ocean, leave it there for 1,000 years, and when you pull it up, it's still going to shine perfectly. But how exactly did that one unique chemical property turn into a societal obsession that shaped the entire map of the world? Well, humanity's madness for gold goes way, way back. It's ancient. I mean, it drove European conquerors like Gonzalo Pizarro to just relentlessly search for El Dorado. And here's a wild fact about El Dorado. The name literally translates to the Golden One. And it wasn't originally a mythical South American city of gold like most people think. Actually, it referred to a king. Rumor had it this king was so astronomically wealthy that he would cover himself from head to toe in pure gold dust and then just dive into a sacred lake purely to wash it off. It's crazy, right? But that intoxicating myth fueled centuries of exploration, dragging folks from Columbus to Pizarro across the ocean, desperately hunting for a legendary wealth that ended up rewriting global history. Or if we really want to talk about flexing wealth, let's talk about Mansa Musa, the ruler of the Mali Empire. Back in 1324, he was on a journey to Mecca and passed through Cairo. We are talking about a camel train with thousands of people and nearly 100 camels, all just loaded down with gold. And he literally handed out so much gold on this trip that he caused a decade of crippling inflation. An Arab historian at the time actually noted that this massive influx of wealth depressed the price of gold in Egypt for over 12 years. It is absolutely mind-blowing to think that one single person's gold reserves could entirely break a regional economy. So to truly understand why gold won out over everything else, we have to trace its evolution. How did we get from wearing prehistoric adornments to gold being the supreme symbol of divine power? If we rewind way back to 100,000 BCE, humans were just decorating themselves with simple shells and bones. But then the Bronze Age hits. Our metallurgical skills level up and we figure out how to isolate gold. By the 6th century BCE over in Anatolia, King Croesus of Lydia is literally inventing the very first true gold coins. Fast forward through the centuries, past the golden amulets of Egypt, straight into the elaborate opulence of the Renaissance, and you can literally watch gold transform from a neat little decorative curiosity into the ultimate benchmark of power and divinity. Now, what I find truly fascinating is how the ancient Egyptians viewed gold. To them, it was way more than just wealth. They literally believed it was the uncorruptible flesh of the gods. And because of its brilliant, never-fading yellow glow, they tied it directly to Ra, the sun god. Think about it from their perspective. In a world where every living thing eventually decays and dies, gold remained absolutely perfect, forever. That's exactly why it was placed into tombs, like the famous golden mask of Tutankhamun, and wrapped up in mummies, using amulets like scarabs and the Ankh. It was all about protecting the soul and asserting a pharaoh's divine right to rule, even in the afterlife. Okay, but moving from ancient myth back to cold, hard science for a second, gold's value ultimately comes down to its undeniable physical properties. Because it's so incredibly dense and unreactive, it is notoriously difficult to counterfeit. Historically, people would test a coin by dropping it to listen for a very specific acoustic ring. Or, and you've probably seen this one, they just bite it. It's a tradition we playfully see today with Olympians biting their medals. Since gold is a relatively soft metal, your teeth would actually leave a mark. Now, detecting modern fakes is a bit trickier. Scammers often use tungsten because it has 99.74% of the specific gravity of gold. So to catch that, you need slightly more advanced tests. Tungsten is weakly paramagnetic, but gold is weakly diamagnetic, which means authenticating modern alloyed gold often requires some seriously strong neodymium magnets to see how it physically reacts. So the really crucial takeaway here is that this unfakeable, almost divine metal eventually sparked the largest mass human migrations in history. And it all started with a super simple discovery at a California sawmill. Picture this, it's January 1848. A carpenter named James Marshall is building a mill for John Sutter, and he spots something shiny in the American River. He runs some pretty basic tests, hits it with a hammer, bites it, and confirms, yep, this is the real deal. Well, the moment that news hit the newspapers, it triggered absolute chaos. Hundreds of thousands of migrants, the famous 49ers, just flooded into California. They came from all over the US and from as far away as China, Chile, and France, literally abandoning their jobs, their homes, their entire lives, all for the promise of striking it rich. But this period brilliantly illustrates the intense duality of the gold rush. Yes, it birthed the American West and triggered an explosive economy, but man, it came at the cost of catastrophic environmental destruction and just immense human suffering. On the positive side of the ledger, the expansion was unprecedented. San Francisco exploded from a sleepy town of 500 people to over 150,000 in just a few years. That pushed California into fast-tracked statehood by 1850 and kicked off the construction of the Transcontinental Railroad. But there was a really dark side. Rivers were completely clogged with sediment. Entire forests and ecosystems were destroyed by toxic mining chemicals. And tragically, there was a horrifying surge of violence and displacement directed at Native American populations, not to mention the intense discrimination faced by Chinese immigrants who had just come seeking a better life. Here's a crazy thought, though. Even if you didn't find a single fleek of gold, the rush still birthed some massive modern brands and icons. Why? Because brilliant entrepreneurs figured out how to mine the miners themselves. The real winners of the gold rush were almost always the merchants. For instance, a German immigrant named Levi Strauss noticed miners were constantly tearing through their clothes, right? So he created these ultra-sturdy canvas pants. Boom, the birth of the blue jean. Then you had Henry Wells and William Fargo, who realized all this sudden new wealth needed a secure financial infrastructure, giving rise to the banking giant Wells Fargo. Even American literature got a boost. A young guy joined his brother prospecting for gold, completely failed at it, but ended up finding his true calling reporting for a San Francisco newspaper under the pen name Mark Twain. So eventually, governments look at all this global chaos and decide they desperately need to tame this wild metal. And that brings us to the birth of modern economics and the gold standard. In theory, the idea was incredibly appealing. A central bank basically stands ready to buy and sell gold at a fixed price, and gold can be freely imported and exported. By tying our paper money directly to something physically limited and globally valued, it was supposed to act as an automatic, self-correcting mechanism. The goal was to prevent governments from endlessly printing money and causing runaway inflation. Sounds like a solid plan, right? But did this system actually create the stability it promised? Well, when we dive into the hard data from the Brookings Institution, we actually see a very different story. While the gold standard tried to offer this self-correcting stability, income growth variability was actually substantially higher than what we saw in the post-war period. If you look at the coefficient of variation for the United States, it was 3.5 under the gold standard, compared to just 1.6 in the post-war era. That's massive. And average unemployment in the U.S. hovered around 6.8% under the gold standard, compared to about 5% afterward. The harsh reality was that tying your entire economy strictly to a physical rock meant that any shock to the gold supply caused immense, immediate suffering for everyday workers. And it gets worse. The gold standard didn't even assure long-term price stability. Just look at the massive economic swells and troughs throughout the 19th century. Between 1816 and 1849 in the U.S., prices plunged by 45%. Then, from 1849 to 1873, they rocketed up 67%, only to drop again by 53% by 1896. That is wild, whiplash-inducing volatility. It's an absolute economic roller coaster. Now, defenders of the standard often point to long-term price stability. But honestly, that was only true if you carefully cherry-picked your starting and ending dates. In reality, the era was defined by constant political turmoil, intense labor strife, and these completely unpredictable economic panics. Which kind of brings us to this final, pretty striking thought. Even though we broke our formal tether to gold decades ago, the fact that we still instinctively hoard it kind of proves our ancient obsession is far from over, doesn't it? The United States started stepping away from the gold standard during the Great Depression with Executive Order 6102, and we completely uncoupled the dollar back in 1971. Yet, if you look closely today, central banks all around the world are still tightly guarding massive reserves of gold bullion deep down in these underground vaults. We literally don't require it to back our money anymore, but the very second economic conditions get a little shaky, people and nations rush right back to it. So after thousands of years, from the pharaohs of Egypt to our modern financial institutions, have we ever really escaped the gravitational pull of this shiny, unbreakable rock?